Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you are about to receive the hidden keys to letting go, ancient wisdom that has been passed down through generations of Zen masters to unlock deep, effortless peace. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I have gathered a selection of rare and transformative stories designed to reveal the lost art of mental and emotional release. Each tale is a guide, meant to dissolve your relationship with worry, frustration, and the restless mind. These are not just stories to be heard. They are teachings to be felt. They come from masters who mastered the one secret that eludes so many, that our freedom is not found in gaining more, but in gracefully letting go. One of the most fundamental truths the Buddha taught was, the root of suffering is attachment. Over the next few hours, these timeless tales will illuminate exactly how to loosen that grip and find the peace that is already waiting within you. As you listen, you may notice a subtle shift begin to occur. The weight you've been carrying on your shoulders may feel a little lighter. The volume of your inner monologue may begin to soften. You'll feel yourself naturally drifting into a state of profound clarity and deep, healing rest. So settle in deeply now. Let your body sink into whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, simply allow yourself to receive these ancient teachings, which have a way of finding us at the exact moment we need them most. Let us now explore our first story about the true nature of wealth and burden. A Zen master traveled the countryside with nothing but a simple cloth bag, walking from village to village, sharing his teachings. His contentment was evident to all who met him, his face peaceful, his step light despite the many miles he traveled each day. In one prosperous village, a wealthy merchant approached him, his brow furrowed with worry lines that spoke of sleepless nights. "Master," the merchant said, bowing nervously, "I possess everything a man could desire: gold, land, fine clothes, servants. Yet my mind knows no peace. I am consumed by the fear of losing what I have. Tell me, what is your secret to being so content with so little?" The master's eyes twinkled with gentle mischief. "Let us make an exchange for one day," he suggested. "You give me what you value most, and I will give you what I value most. But we must return these treasures at sunset." Intrigued despite his anxiety, the merchant agreed. With trembling hands, he presented a heavy pouch filled with gold coins, his most prized possession. In return, the master reached into his worn cloth bag and withdrew something that made the merchant gasp. It was a diamond of extraordinary beauty, flawless and brilliant, catching the afternoon light like captured starfire. The merchant's heart raced with excitement. This single stone was worth more than his entire fortune. But as he held it, something unexpected happened. The initial joy transformed into a crushing weight of terror. The diamond was too valuable to put down, too precious to trust to anyone else. Every passerby became a potential thief. Every shadow harbored danger. The merchant spent the day in a state of hypervigilance, his mind racing with fears, his body tense with anxiety. When sunset approached, he rushed back to the master, thrusting the diamond toward him with desperate relief. "Please take it back," he pleaded. "The burden is unbearable. It is too heavy to carry." The master accepted the diamond with the same calm with which he had given it, returning the gold coins to the merchant. As the exchange was completed, the merchant felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash through his entire being. The lesson the master said softly, is not in the diamond itself, but in your relationship to it. You are not carrying the diamond, you are carrying your fear of losing it. True wealth lies not in possessing the treasure, but in your ability to hold it lightly, and when the time comes, to let it go. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between having and grasping, between appreciation and attachment. We suffer not because of what we possess or lack, but because of our desperate clinging to things that are, by their very nature, impermanent. Why do we transform blessings into burdens through our attachment? Zen Buddhism teaches that the ego creates a false sense of security by accumulating and controlling. We believe that if we can just gather enough money, enough success, enough love, we will finally be safe. But this strategy backfires because it makes us prisoners of our possessions. The more we have to lose, the more we live in fear of loss. Consider how this plays out in modern life. The promotion we worked so hard to achieve becomes a source of stress as we worry about maintaining our performance. The relationship we cherish becomes suffocating when we grip it too tightly, afraid our partner might leave. The beautiful home we save for becomes a burden when we're constantly anxious about mortgage payments or property values. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. This paradox points to the middle way between careless indifference and obsessive attachment. We can appreciate beauty, work toward goals, and care for what matters without the crushing weight of clinging. The diamond in the story represents all the gifts life offers us: relationships, experiences, achievements, even our own lives. These gifts are meant to be held with open hands, appreciated fully while they're present, and released gracefully when their time has passed. When we grasp too tightly, we squeeze the joy out of the very things we're trying to protect. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron reminds us, the root of suffering is resisting the certainty that no matter what the circumstances, uncertainty is all we truly have. The merchant's suffering came not from the diamond's value, but from his resistance to the uncertainty inherent in possessing something precious. The practice of letting go doesn't mean becoming indifferent or careless. It means developing what Zen calls don't know mind, a state of openness that can receive fully without grasping desperately. When we hold our treasures lightly, we can actually enjoy them more deeply because we're not consumed by the fear of their loss. Tonight, as you consider what you might be holding too tightly in your own life, can you experiment with loosening your grip just slightly? Perhaps it's your savings account, your relationship status, your career trajectory, or even your self-image. What would it feel like to appreciate these gifts without the exhausting effort of trying to control them? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just 3 things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Our next story reveals how we create suffering through our refusal to let moments pass. A provincial governor, a man accustomed to deference and control, visited a renowned Zen master. As they sat for tea in the master's simple quarters, the governor filled the air with accounts of his power and influence, describing the complex affairs of state he managed with great self-importance. The master listened with patient attention, his gentle smile never wavering. When an attendant arrived to serve tea, he moved with practiced grace, first filling the master's cup with steady hands. As he turned to pour for the governor, a small fly, seemingly from nowhere, buzzed erratically through the air and dove directly into the stream of hot tea, falling with a tiny splash into the governor's cup. The governor's face transformed instantly into a mask of rage. He slammed his fist on the low table, making the cups rattle. "How dare you serve me this filthy tea?" he roared. "This is an outrageous insult to my office. Have this incompetent fool punished immediately." The master calmly lifted his own cup, took a slow, mindful sip, and regarded the governor with eyes full of compassion. "The fly," he said in a voice like still water, "had no intention of offending you. It was simply flying as flies do. The tea had no intention of receiving it. It was simply hot liquid in a cup. The cup had no intention of holding either. It is simply a vessel. Each element was just being itself." He paused, allowing his words to settle. "The fly is dead. The tea is no longer drinkable. That part of the story is finished. But why are you choosing to keep it alive in your mind? Why carry this tiny corpse with you for the rest of the day?" The governor sat in stunned silence, feeling the heat of his anger slowly drain away like water from a broken dam. In its place came the uncomfortable recognition that he had been disturbed not by a fly, but by his own refusal to let the moment pass. The Buddha once said, "Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." What emerges from this story is our tendency to prolong suffering by refusing to let unpleasant moments die their natural death. Why do we cling so tenaciously to our grievances? Zen Buddhism points to the ego's investment in being right, in maintaining its sense of importance and control. When something doesn't match our expectations, the ego creates a story about why this is wrong, unfair, or personally offensive. We become so identified with this story that we forget it's just a mental construction we're choosing to maintain. The fly in the story represents all the small irritations that punctuate our days. The traffic delay, the rude comment, the spilled coffee, the technology that won't cooperate. These incidents are like weather patterns in consciousness. They arise, exist briefly, and naturally pass away. But we often grab onto them, replay them, elaborate on them, and carry them forward long after their natural lifespan has ended. Think about your own experience. How often do you find yourself rehearsing conversations from hours or even days ago, continuing arguments that are already over? How much mental energy do you spend on things that went wrong, situations you can't change, or people who disappointed you? Each replay is like keeping the fly alive in your tea, contaminating the present moment with the residue of the past. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The governor's anger seemed so solid, so justified, but it was just another impermanent phenomenon arising and passing away. His suffering came from trying to freeze this moment, to keep it alive through righteous indignation. The practice of letting go doesn't mean becoming passive or allowing others to treat us badly. It means recognizing when we're holding on to something that's already finished, when we're animating the corpse of a dead moment through our continued attention to it. We can address practical issues, perhaps the attendant needs better training, without carrying the emotional residue forward. Japanese Zen emphasizes the concept of mono, no aware, the poignant awareness of the impermanence of all things. Even our irritations and disappointments are temporary visitors in consciousness. When we stop feeding them with our attention, they dissolve naturally, making space for whatever wants to arise next. Tonight, as you notice your mind returning to some small disappointment or irritation from today, can you ask yourself, is this fly still alive, or am I keeping its corpse in my tea? Can you honor the natural passing of moments by letting them go when their time is done? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment. Let us continue our journey with a tale about finding abundance in loss. The beloved poet-monk Ryokan lived in profound simplicity in a small hut nestled at the foot of Mount Kugami. His life was a prayer of contentment, finding joy in the smallest natural wonders. Each spring, he would watch with childlike delight as tender bamboo shoots emerged near his dwelling, checking on their progress daily like a parent watching over growing children. One particular spring morning, Ryokan walked to the nearby village to share teachings with the local farmers. The mountain air was crisp and clean, filled with the songs of returning birds. He spent the day in gentle conversation about the Dharma, his heart full of peace. As evening approached and golden light began to slant through the forest, he made his way home along the familiar mountain path. Upon reaching his hut, Ryokan discovered that someone had dug up all his cherished bamboo shoots. The earth where they had been growing was scattered and empty, small holes marking where each tender shoot had been carefully extracted. A visiting student who had arrived earlier witnessed Ryokan's discovery and was immediately inflamed with righteous anger on his teacher's behalf. "Master Ryokan," the student exclaimed, his face flushed with indignation. "That neighbor has stolen your precious bamboo shoots. We must go to him immediately and demand he return them or make proper amends. He has robbed you of your spring joy." Ryokan gazed quietly at the disturbed earth where his shoots had grown, showing no trace of sorrow or anger. His expression remained as serene as Mountain Lake at dawn. After a long moment of contemplation, he turned to his agitated student with eyes that sparkled with gentle amusement. "Yes," he said simply, "the bamboo shoots are gone. That much is true." He paused, then raised his arm to point westward, where the sun was setting in a magnificent display of orange and purple fire across the sky. But look, he could not steal the sunset. Ryokan's teaching illuminated a profound truth. When we release our grip on what has been taken from us, we remain open to receive the beauty that can never be possessed by anyone. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace." This ancient wisdom illuminates how loss becomes liberation when we stop defining ourselves by what we've lost and open our eyes to what remains infinitely available. Why do we become so consumed by what has been taken that we miss the gifts still being offered? Zen Buddhism teaches that the mind creates a false scarcity by focusing obsessively on the missing piece, rather than appreciating the wholeness that surrounds us. We develop tunnel vision, seeing only the empty space where something used to be, blind to the abundance that continues to flow. Consider how this pattern manifests in daily life. When someone cancels plans, we might spend the evening frustrated about the social connection we've lost, rather than enjoying the unexpected solitude. When we don't get the job we wanted, we might become so focused on the rejection that we miss other opportunities appearing around us. When a relationship ends, we might become so consumed by what we've lost that we're unable to receive the love that friends and family continue to offer. The bamboo shoots in the story represent all the attachments we form to specific outcomes, particular possessions, or certain people. These attachments are natural and human, but they become sources of suffering when we believe our happiness depends entirely on keeping them. Ryokan's neighbor could take the bamboo shoots, but he couldn't diminish the vast web of beauty and wonder that surrounded them both. This reveals a profound shift from scarcity consciousness to abundance awareness. Scarcity consciousness operates from the belief that there isn't enough, not enough love, beauty, opportunity, or joy. So we must hoard whatever good fortune comes our way. We become like misers of experience, clutching our precious moments so tightly that we squeeze the life out of them. Abundance awareness recognizes that the universe is continuously offering gifts, but we can only receive them when our hands aren't already full of yesterday's treasures. Watch how this plays out in relationships. When we're convinced that love is scarce, we become possessive and jealous, afraid that our partner's attention given to others somehow diminishes what's available to us. But love, like sunlight, doesn't decrease when shared. In fact, it often multiplies. The person who can celebrate their friend's success without jealousy has discovered this secret. There is enough joy to go around. Zen teacher Alan Watts often spoke about the difference between grasping and receiving. When we grasp, we close our hands around one thing and miss everything else. When we receive, we keep our hands open and our hearts available to whatever life is offering in this moment. The sunset was always there, but the student couldn't see it until his teacher pointed it out. His anger had closed his eyes to beauty. The practice of letting go reveals an astonishing truth. The things we can lose were never the source of our deepest fulfillment anyway. The sunset, the changing seasons, the breath in our bodies, the capacity for wonder and appreciation, these cannot be stolen because they don't belong to anyone. They belong to the universe itself, and we are part of that universe. Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. When we forget the small self that owns and loses, we remember the larger self that is intimately connected to all life. From this perspective, the neighbor who took the bamboo shoots was not stealing from Ryokan, but participating in the same natural flow of giving and receiving that moves through all existence. Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield reminds us, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Ryokan embodied this wisdom by living so lightly that theft became impossible. His joy was rooted not in having particular things, but in his capacity to appreciate whatever appeared. The student's anger was natural, but limiting. He could see only injustice and loss. Ryokan's response revealed a more spacious way of being, one that could hold disappointment alongside wonder, loss alongside beauty. This doesn't mean being naive about wrongdoing or failing to address practical concerns. It means not allowing our grievances to eclipse the continuous miracle of existence. Tonight, as you reflect on something you feel has been taken from you, perhaps trust, opportunity, health, or time, can you lift your eyes to see what sunset is painting itself across your sky right now? What beauty remains available to you that no circumstance can diminish? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Now, let us turn to a story about the prison of perfectionism and the freedom found in beginning. A young sculptor, ambitious and talented, had traveled many miles to reach a monastery famous for its exquisite Buddha statues. Each carving seemed to capture something beyond mere craftsmanship, a quality of presence that touched all who beheld them. The sculptor sought out the elderly Zen master who had created many of these remarkable works, hoping to learn the secret of such perfection. "Master," the young man said, bowing deeply, "I have studied anatomy until I know every curve of the human form. I have mastered every tool of my craft and acquired the finest block of marble money can buy. Yet, I find myself paralyzed, unable to make even the first cut. I am so afraid of creating something imperfect, so terrified of failing to capture the sublime vision in my mind that I cannot begin at all." The master listened with patient attention, then led the young sculptor to a dusty, forgotten corner of the monastery workshop. There, covered in years of accumulated dust and seeming utterly ordinary, sat a large block of wood. It was unremarkable in every way, neither beautiful nor ugly, neither valuable nor worthless, simply a block of wood, waiting. "What do you see?" the master asked quietly. The sculptor looked confused. "I see a block of wood, master. Nothing more." The old master ran his weathered hand over the dusty surface with surprising tenderness. "I have kept this block for 40 years, he said. "When I was your age, filled with the same burning ambition, I saw in my mind's eye the most perfect Buddha statue ever carved. I searched everywhere for the ideal piece of wood, and when I found this one, I knew it was perfect. But I also knew my skill was not yet equal to my vision, so I decided to wait and practice on lesser pieces first." His voice grew softer, almost wistful. "Years passed. My technical skill grew, but somehow my vision of the perfect Buddha also grew, always remaining just beyond my reach. I became so attached to the possibility of absolute perfection that I could never dare to touch this wood. I was afraid to let go of the dream of what it could become." The master's eyes met the young sculptor's. "This block of wood taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. Perfection is a beautiful prison. The Buddha is not waiting in some final, flawless statue. The Buddha is present in the willingness to make the first cut, to let go of the grand vision in your head and be fully present with the wood in your hands. Go now. Ruin your marble. Only in the courage to begin imperfectly can you discover what wants to emerge." The Buddha understood that our attachment to outcomes creates suffering when he said, "You are what you think. With your thoughts, you make the world." The deeper teaching here shows us how the pursuit of perfection becomes a form of spiritual materialism, using lofty ideals to avoid the vulnerable act of creation. Why do we become so paralyzed by the gap between our vision and our current ability? Zen Buddhism reveals that the ego uses perfectionism as a sophisticated form of procrastination. By setting impossible standards, we protect ourselves from the humbling experience of being beginners, from the necessary failures that teach us what we cannot learn any other way. Perfectionism becomes a spiritual materialism, using lofty ideals to avoid the vulnerable act of creation. The deeper psychology of perfectionism reveals itself as a fear of judgment, both from others and from our own inner critic. We imagine that if we wait long enough, study hard enough, or prepare thoroughly enough, we can bypass the awkward phase of learning and emerge fully formed. But this fantasy robs us of the very experiences that create growth. Every master craftsperson has a basement full of early attempts that make them cringe, yet those failures were the stepping stones to mastery. This pattern appears everywhere in modern life. The person who wants to write a novel but never begins because they don't have the perfect plot. The individual who avoids meditation because they can't sit still for an hour. The artist who hoards expensive supplies rather than risk wasting them on imperfect attempts. The entrepreneur who endlessly refines their business plan rather than launching and learning from real feedback. The parent who waits for the perfect moment to have a difficult conversation with their child, while the child grows up without the guidance they need. Consider the deeper implications. Perfectionism often masks a deeper fear of being seen as ordinary, human, fallible. In our achievement-oriented culture, we're taught that our worth depends on our performance. This creates what Buddhist teacher Tara Brach calls the trance of unworthiness, the belief that we must earn our place in the world through flawless execution rather than accepting our inherent value as conscious beings. The dusty block of wood represents all our unlived potential waiting behind the perfectionist's gate. Every creative impulse that dies in the planning stage. Every conversation we don't have because we can't find the perfect words. Every risk we don't take because we can't guarantee the outcome. These accumulated moments of non-action become a kind of death by 1,000 postponements. Zen Master Dogen taught, "Time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away." The Master's 40-year relationship with the uncarved block reveals how perfectionism distorts our relationship with time. Instead of experiencing the continuous present moment of creative engagement, we live in a perpetual future where conditions will somehow be ideal. But that future never arrives because the conditions are never quite right, the vision never quite achievable with current skills. The practice of letting go includes releasing our attachment to outcomes and embracing what Suzuki Roshi called beginner's mind. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. When we let go of needing to create something perfect, we become available to discover what wants to emerge through us. This requires what Zen calls don't know mind, a willingness to start without knowing where we'll end up. Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa spoke of basic wakefulness, the quality of being fully present with what is rather than what should be. The young sculptor's marble was not waiting for him to become worthy of it. It was waiting for him to show up as he was, with his current level of skill and whatever willingness he could muster. This doesn't mean abandoning excellence or becoming careless. It means recognizing that excellence emerges through engagement, not through endless preparation. Every master was once a beginner who kept going. Every masterpiece was created by someone willing to risk making something imperfect. The Buddha statue exists not in the final form, but in the relationship between the carver and the wood, the continuous conversation between vision and reality, intention and acceptance. When we let go of the need to be perfect, we can finally begin to be present. Tonight, as you consider some creative impulse you've been postponing until you feel ready, can you make one small, imperfect beginning? Can you write one awkward paragraph, take one uncertain step, have one difficult conversation? What would it feel like to let go of your vision of perfection and simply meet this moment with whatever skill and courage you actually have? As the Buddha taught, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis. When you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. as we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a powerful story about the ultimate practice of letting go. An ancient Zen master lay dying, his breath growing shallow as his devoted monks gathered around his bedside. For decades, he had been their spiritual father, offering profound teachings that had illuminated the path for countless seekers. Now, as his life ebbed away, the monks felt a desperate urgency to capture one final piece of wisdom, something they could carry forward to preserve his legacy. The head monk, his heart heavy with impending loss, leaned close to his teacher's ear. "Master," he whispered, voice trembling with emotion, "you have given us so much wisdom over the years. Before you leave us, could you please offer one final teaching, one essential truth that captures the heart of your understanding?" The master's eyes, though clouded with approaching death, slowly opened. He looked at each beloved face surrounding him, seeing their grief, their hope, their desperate need for something to hold on to. With tremendous effort, he gathered what little strength remained in his frail body. His lips parted, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke a single word: attention. The head monk recoiled slightly, surprised and disappointed. He had expected something profound, a complex verse, a philosophical revelation, a spiritual instruction worthy of their teacher's stature. This seemed too simple, too ordinary for such a momentous occasion. Surely there must be more. "Master," he pressed gently, "is that all? Just attention?" The dying teacher managed the slightest nod, his energy nearly spent. Still unsatisfied, feeling that his teacher's final gift was somehow incomplete, the head monk leaned closer. "But Master, could you not elaborate just a little? Could you not give us something more to guide us?" With his final breath barely audible, the master whispered, "Attention, attention." Then he was gone, leaving his students in profound silence, not with a grand philosophy to grasp or complex doctrine to study, but with the simplest possible instruction, the invitation to be fully present. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the present moment is the only moment available to us, and it is the door to all moments. Here we discover that the ultimate letting go is the release of everything that takes us away from this immediate experience, the past that no longer exists, the future that has not yet arrived, and the mental commentary that separates us from direct contact with reality. Why is attention so difficult to sustain? And why did the master consider it the essence of all spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism teaches that our habitual mind is like a restless monkey, constantly jumping from branch to branch, from memory to fantasy, from worry to planning, from judgment to desire. This mental activity creates a veil between us and the immediacy of our actual experience, causing us to live in a kind of dream rather than reality. The monks wanted something to hold on to, some concept they could preserve and study. But attention cannot be possessed like knowledge or stored like treasure. It can only be practiced, moment by moment, breath by breath. It is the one thing that cannot be taken from us, yet it is the one thing we most easily give away. Consider how rarely we give anything our complete attention. While eating, we read or watch television. While walking, we listen to podcasts or plan our day. While talking with loved ones, we think about what we'll say next. While working, we check our phones. We live in a constant state of divided attention, never fully present to any single experience. The master's final teaching points to what Zen calls just this moment awareness. Not attention plus something else. Not attention as a means to an end, but attention itself as the complete practice. When we are fully present to washing dishes, we are practicing the Dharma. When we are completely absorbed in listening to a friend, we are in meditation. When we are entirely focused on our breath, we are touching the eternal now. Vietnamese master Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, the most precious gift we can offer others is our presence. This presence is not something we have to manufacture or achieve. It is our natural state when we stop running away from this moment. Every time we let go of mental commentary and return to direct experience, we come home to ourselves. The practice of attention is simultaneously the simplest and most challenging thing we can do. Simple because it requires no special equipment, no particular posture, no complex philosophy. Challenging because it asks us to let go of our habitual ways of escaping the present moment. Our thoughts, worries, fantasies, and endless mental activity. Buddhist teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn reminds us, wherever you go, there you are. The Master's dying words were an invitation to stop going anywhere else. To stop seeking enlightenment in the future, wisdom in books, or peace in better circumstances. Everything we need is available in this moment, but only when we show up for it completely. The ultimate letting go is letting go of the one who is trying to let go. When we simply pay attention to what is actually happening, the breath entering and leaving the body, the sounds arising and passing away, the thoughts appearing and dissolving, we discover that the separate self who was trying so hard to achieve something was itself just another mental construction. Attention is not a means to an end, but the end itself. Not a path to awakening, but awakening itself. In complete attention, there is no attender and nothing being attended to, just the seamless wholeness of experience itself. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, can you give your complete attention to just one thing? Perhaps the sensation of your head touching the pillow, the rhythm of your breathing, or the sounds of the night. Can you let go of the need to be anywhere else, to be anyone else, to have any experience other than this one? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything, what you think you become. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured toward the vast sky above them. where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson, "I have learned to always like what I get, so I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance, not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a teaching about the profound difference between passive surrender and active compassion. This is the parable of the lion and the fox. In a land where drought had lasted many months and both humans and animals struggled to find sustenance, there lived a man whose heart burned with spiritual longing. Every day he prayed with desperate intensity, asking for the awareness and wisdom that would bring success to his life. His prayers were sincere, but filled with anxiety, for he had tried many approaches to prosperity, various jobs, different strategies, numerous plans, yet nothing had brought him the security and fulfillment he sought. His frustration grew as his resources dwindled and his situation became increasingly precarious. There must be some secret to life that I'm missing, he thought. Some spiritual principle that, once understood, will unlock the doors to abundance and peace. One night, after hours of fervent prayer, he fell into a deep sleep and began to dream. In his dream, a voice spoke to him with crystal clarity. "Go into the forest tomorrow morning. There you will find the understanding you seek." The man woke with his heart pounding with excitement and hope. This felt different from ordinary dreams. The voice had carried such authority, such certainty. Without delay, he prepared simple provisions and set out at first light for the ancient forest that bordered his village. For several hours, he wandered among towering trees and winding paths, his eyes searching for some sign, some teacher, some revelation that would provide the answers to his prayers. The morning air was cool and fragrant with wildflowers, but his anxiety made it difficult to appreciate the natural beauty surrounding him. As midday heat began to build, exhaustion forced him to rest beside a small stream. He sat on a smooth boulder, wondering if he had misunderstood the dream's message, when movement caught his eye between two large rocks in a shaded alcove nearby. To his amazement, he discovered a fox lying peacefully in the cool space, but this fox had no legs. Where its limbs should have been, there were only healed scars, yet the animal appeared calm and well-nourished rather than starving or distressed as he would have expected. How extraordinary, the man thought. How does a creature with no ability to hunt or forage manage to survive in the wilderness? Curious and sensing this might be connected to his spiritual quest, he concealed himself and waited to see what would happen. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in golden light, he heard heavy footsteps approaching through the underbrush. A magnificent lion emerged into the clearing, carrying fresh meat in its powerful jaws. Without any apparent reason or expectation of return, the lion gently placed the meat directly in front of the legless fox and then disappeared back into the forest. The man's heart leaped with understanding. "Ah," he exclaimed silently, "now I see the secret to success in life. The answer is complete surrender and trust. I don't need to struggle and strive and worry about providing for myself. All I need to do is have faith that the universe will take care of all my needs. God will provide everything, just as the lion provides for the fox. My role is simply to trust and receive." Filled with this new spiritual insight, the man returned home and immediately began practicing what he believed he had learned. He stopped seeking work, stopped making efforts to improve his situation, and instead spent his days in prayer and meditation, waiting for providence to supply his needs as it had for the legless fox. Days passed, then weeks. His food stores depleted, his strength began to fade, and his situation became desperate. Yet he maintained his faith that his surrender would be rewarded, that his trust would be vindicated by divine intervention. 2 weeks into this experiment, weak from hunger and beginning to doubt his interpretation, the man had another vivid dream. The same authoritative voice that had sent him to the forest now spoke again. but this time with a tone of gentle correction. "Fool," the voice said, not with cruelty, but with compassionate clarity. "Be like the lion, not like the fox." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." The story points us toward understanding the profound difference between spiritual surrender and spiritual service. Why do we sometimes mistake passivity for spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind often seeks the path of least resistance, preferring to receive rather than give, to be cared for rather than to care for others. True surrender involves releasing our attachment to outcomes while maintaining wholehearted engagement with compassionate action. The man's initial interpretation represented a common spiritual misunderstanding, the belief that faith means waiting for external forces to solve our problems. But genuine spiritual maturity involves recognizing our responsibility to be the hands and heart through which compassion flows into the world. Look deeply at your own relationship to giving and receiving. Are there areas where you've been waiting for others to provide what you could offer yourself? Perhaps waiting for someone else to create the community you long for, to start the project you've envisioned, or to show the kindness you wish to see in the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between victim consciousness and co-creator consciousness. The fox, through no choice of its own, required care and received it through the lion's generosity. But humans possess capacities the fox lacks: intelligence, creativity, the ability to plan and provide not only for ourselves, but for others who truly cannot provide for themselves. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual awakening doesn't exempt us from worldly responsibility, but transforms how we engage with it. True faith isn't passive waiting, but active participation in the web of interdependence that connects all beings. We are called to be both lion and fox, receiving grace when we genuinely need it, offering strength when others require our support. Consider the people in your life who might be in the fox's position through circumstances beyond their control: illness, age, disability, or temporary crisis. And consider the areas where you have lion-like capacities, skills, resources, energy, or opportunities that could serve others' well-being. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." This teaching points toward the natural movement from self-preoccupation to selfless service that marks spiritual maturity. The man's transformation from seeking to be cared for to recognizing his calling to care for others represents the shift from spiritual materialism to genuine Dharma practice. Instead of using spirituality to get what we want, we begin using our gifts to give what others need. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called the Bodhisattva ideal, the aspiration to work for the liberation of all beings rather than seeking only our own comfort and security. This doesn't mean we neglect our genuine needs, but that we hold them within the larger context of universal well-being. The Buddha said, "If you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path." Often, the success and fulfillment we seek comes not through focusing on our own needs, but through dedicating ourselves to serving something greater than our personal concerns. This teaching challenges us to examine our motivations for spiritual practice itself. Are we seeking enlightenment as a form of ultimate self-improvement, Or are we cultivating wisdom and compassion to better serve the world's needs? Are we praying for divine provision? Or are we asking how we can become instruments of provision for others? The voice in the dream offered correction with love, not condemnation. The man's initial misunderstanding was part of his learning process, not a spiritual failure. Sometimes we need to experience our own helplessness before we can understand our power to help others. Tonight, as you consider the gifts and capacities you've been given, can you sense how they might be intended, not just for your own security, but for the welfare of others? Can you feel the difference between spiritual seeking that focuses on what you can get and spiritual practice that asks what you can give? As the Buddha taught, in caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others. The lion's generous feeding of the fox represents the natural flow of compassion that arises when we recognize our fundamental interconnection. By being the lion when we can, we ensure that others will be lions for us when we truly need their care. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement. Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, "A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown?" At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need. but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The Master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The Master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Let us continue on our journey with a story about how our inner landscape shapes our outer experience. This is the tale of the two towns. In a bustling marketplace where merchants hawked their wares and travelers stopped to rest on their journeys, a wise Zen master had established a modest tea stall. People came not only for refreshment, but for the master's reputation for offering practical wisdom to those facing life's transitions and uncertainties. On this particular day, two different men approached the master's stall, each carrying the same question but embodying very different energies. Both were considering major life changes. Both were strangers to this place, and both sought guidance about whether this town might become their new home. The first man arrived with a tense expression, his shoulders carrying the weight of accumulated frustrations. As he approached the tea stall, his eyes darted around suspiciously, already assessing and finding fault with what he observed. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he announced without preamble. "What's it like?" The Zen master looked at the man with gentle attention, noting not just his words, but the quality of energy he brought to the question. Rather than offering immediate description, the master asked his own question. "What was your old town like?" The first man's response came quickly, as if he had rehearsed these complaints many times. "It was dreadful," he said with obvious bitterness. "Everyone was hateful and unfriendly. The neighbors were inconsiderate, the shopkeepers were rude, and the whole place was full of selfish, unpleasant people. I couldn't stand it there anymore." The master nodded thoughtfully, his expression remaining compassionate despite the negativity pouring from his visitor. "This town is very much the same," he replied simply. "I don't think you should move here." The first man's face darkened with disappointment and frustration. Without another word, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath about how this place was probably just as bad as everywhere else. Shortly after the first man departed, the second traveler approached the tea stall. His manner was notably different, relaxed, curious, and open. His eyes took in the surroundings with appreciation rather than judgment, and when he smiled at the master, it seemed to come from a place of genuine warmth. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he said cheerfully. "What's it like?" The master regarded this second visitor with the same careful attention he had given the first, again choosing to learn more before offering his assessment. "What was your old town like?" he asked. The second man's face lit up as he considered the question. "It was wonderful," he said with obvious fondness. "Everyone was so friendly and helpful. My neighbors looked out for each other. The local merchants knew everyone by name. And there was a real sense of community. I was very happy there. I'm only considering a change because I'm looking for new adventures and opportunities." The master smiled knowingly. "This town is very much the same," he told the second man. "I think you will like it here very much." The second man's face broke into a delighted grin. He thanked the master warmly and walked away with a spring in his step, already seeing possibilities and connections in his new environment. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. This ancient insight illuminates the profound truth demonstrated by the master's seemingly contradictory responses to the two travelers. Here, we discover one of the most fundamental principles of human experience. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. The master gave identical answers to both men because he recognized that their questions revealed far more about their internal states than about their external circumstances. Why do some people find community and kindness wherever they go, while others encounter hostility and disappointment in the same environments? Buddhist psychology explains that our perceptual filters, shaped by our habitual mental patterns, literally create our experienced reality. We notice evidence that confirms our existing beliefs while filtering out information that contradicts them. The first man carried what modern psychology might call a negative attribution bias, the tendency to interpret ambiguous situations in the most negative possible way. His mind was like a magnet for negative experiences, not because the world was inherently hostile, but because that's what he was conditioned to see. The second man demonstrated the opposite pattern, a generous attribution style that assumed the best in others and looked for positive connections. His mind was attuned to kindness and possibility. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Two people can work in the same office and have completely different experiences. One sees politics, competition, and dysfunction everywhere. The other finds mentorship, collaboration, and growth opportunities in the same environment. This doesn't mean that objective conditions don't matter, or that all experiences are equally positive. Rather, it points to the enormous influence our mental habits have on shaping our lived reality. As Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn says, "Wherever you go, there you are." We carry our internal weather with us, and it colors everything we encounter. The master's wisdom lay in recognizing that no external change of location could solve the first man's problem. If he moved to this town with the same negative perceptual filters, he would recreate the same disappointing experiences he was trying to escape. This insight has profound implications for how we approach life changes and problem solving. Often, when we're unhappy with our circumstances, our first instinct is to change the external conditions. But if we don't address the internal patterns that created our dissatisfaction, we simply recreate similar problems in new settings. But this principle works in both directions. When we cultivate mental habits of appreciation, curiosity, and goodwill, we begin to notice more evidence supporting those perspectives. The world doesn't magically change, but our capacity to see its positive qualities expands dramatically. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences of community, work, and relationships, can you notice the interpretive lens through which you typically view these interactions? Are you more like the first traveler, scanning for problems and disappointments, or the second, looking for connection and possibility? As the Buddha taught, The mind is everything, what you think you become. The most powerful tool for transforming our external experience lies not in changing our circumstances, but in changing the quality of awareness we bring to whatever circumstances we encounter. Let us now explore a story about choice, responsibility, and the power we hold in every moment. This is the tale of the young man and the bird. A clever young student had grown tired of his teacher's seemingly wise responses to every question. He was convinced that the old master simply spoke in riddles to appear profound, and he decided to devise a test that would expose what he believed was mere pretense. After thinking for several days, he conceived what he thought was the perfect trap. One morning, the young man caught a small sparrow in the garden. The tiny bird trembled in his cupped hands, its heart beating rapidly against his palms. He held it carefully behind his back as he approached his teacher, who was sitting peacefully in the morning sunlight, reading ancient texts. "Master," the student called out with barely concealed excitement, "I have a question that will test your legendary wisdom." The old teacher looked up from his reading with patient, gentle eyes. He had seen this look of mischievous confidence in many students over the years, and he understood the young man's need to challenge authority as part of his own growth and learning. "Please," the teacher said simply, "ask your question." The student stepped closer, keeping the bird hidden behind his back. "Master, I hold a small bird in my hands. Using your great wisdom, tell me, is this bird alive or dead?" The young man felt incredibly clever. He had created what he believed was an impossible situation for his teacher. If the master answered alive, he would quickly snap the bird's neck and reveal the dead creature, proving the teacher wrong. If the master answered dead, he would simply open his hands and let the living bird fly away, again proving the teacher's lack of true insight. Either way, the student was certain he would expose his teacher's supposed wisdom as nothing more than lucky guessing and philosophical double talk. He waited eagerly for the response that would give him the satisfaction of finally outsmarting the old man. The teacher sat quietly for a long moment, not trying to peer behind the student's back or gather more information. His eyes seemed to look not at the student, but through him, as if perceiving something far deeper than the simple trick being attempted. Finally, with a gentle smile that held both compassion and understanding, the master spoke. "The answer, my young friend, is in your hands." The student stood frozen, his mouth hanging open slightly. In 3 simple words, his elaborate trap had been completely dismantled. The teacher hadn't fallen for either option of the false dilemma. Instead, he had pointed to something far more profound: the fundamental truth that the student himself held the power to determine the outcome. The young man looked down at his hands, still cupped behind his back, feeling the tiny bird's rapid heartbeat against his palms. He realized with startling clarity that the master was right. The bird's fate had never depended on the teacher's answer or supposed wisdom. It had always been entirely in the student's control. More than that, he began to understand that this was true about far more than just this moment. The power to choose life or death, creation or destruction, compassion or cruelty, all of it was always in his hands, in every situation, every day. Slowly, the young man brought his hands forward and opened them. The small bird sat still for just a moment, as if gathering itself, then spread its wings and flew into the blue sky, disappearing among the trees. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound responsibility that comes with conscious choice and the recognition that we are always the architects of our own experience. Why do we so often look outside ourselves for answers that can only be found within? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to seek authority figures who will tell us what to do, what to think, what to choose. But the deepest teaching is that true wisdom cannot be given from one person to another. It can only be discovered through our own conscious engagement with life. The student's question seemed to be about the teacher's insight, but it was actually about his own power. He was so focused on proving the master wrong that he almost missed the profound truth being offered, that every moment presents us with choices that shape not only our immediate circumstances, but our character and destiny. Consider your own daily decisions, both large and small. How often do you wait for someone else to tell you what the right choice is? How frequently do you seek permission, approval, or guidance for decisions that ultimately rest entirely in your own hands? The young man's bird represents all the power we hold, but sometimes fail to recognize. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual development, we constantly face moments where we hold something precious in our hands: the well-being of others, our own integrity, opportunities for growth or destruction. The outcome depends not on external circumstances or other people's wisdom, but on what we choose to do with the power we possess. The Master's response reveals something crucial about authentic teaching. True teachers don't give answers. They point us back to our own capacity for wisdom. They help us recognize the choices we're already making and the power we already possess, rather than encouraging dependence on their authority. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "We are always in choice, even when we think we're not." The bird in the student's hands represents all the moments when we convince ourselves we have no options, no power, no responsibility. But consciousness always involves choice, and choice always involves responsibility. Look deeply at a current challenge in your life. Where are you waiting for someone else to provide answers, solutions, or direction? What would change if you fully recognize that the power to shape the outcome is already in your hands? This doesn't mean you have control over all external circumstances, but you always have choice about how you respond. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. Every thought, every intention, every action is like the student's choice with the bird, an opportunity to create life or death, beauty or suffering, wisdom or ignorance. The answer is always in our hands. Tonight, as you consider the various situations in your life where you seek guidance or feel powerless, can you sense the truth the Master was pointing to? Can you feel the weight of the choices you carry every day, not as a burden, but as the fundamental dignity of conscious existence? As the Buddha observed, no one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. The bird flies free, not because of the teacher's wisdom, but because of the student's choice. In recognizing our own power to choose life over death, compassion over cruelty, truth over deception, we discover that the answer to every important question has always been in our hands. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about true spiritual power. This is the tale of the miracle of ordinary living. At Ryumon Temple, the renowned Zen master Bankei was sharing the Dharma with a large gathering of devoted students. The hall was filled with people sitting in quiet attention, absorbing his simple yet profound teachings about living with natural awareness. The evening light filtered through the temple windows, creating an atmosphere of peace and contemplation. In the midst of his discourse, a disturbance arose near the back of the hall. A Shinshu priest, whose own temple had been losing followers to Bankai's growing reputation, pushed his way through the crowd with obvious agitation. His face was flushed with jealousy, and his movements were sharp with competitive energy. Bankai paused his teaching and looked toward the commotion with patient curiosity. "What is this noise that interrupts our evening together?" he asked gently, his voice carrying no irritation despite the disruption. The priest stood up boldly, his voice rising above the murmur of the crowd. "The founder of our sect," he boasted loudly, "had such miraculous powers that he held a brush in his hand on one bank of the river. His attendant held up a paper on the other bank, and the teacher wrote the holy name of Amida through the air. Can you do such a wonderful thing?" The gathered students turned their attention between the challenging priest and their teacher, curious how Bankei would respond to this test of his spiritual abilities. Some expected a demonstration of supernatural powers. Others wondered if their master would engage in debate. Bankai smiled, with the gentle amusement of someone who understood the priest's confusion completely. "Perhaps your fox can perform that trick," he replied lightly. "But that is not the manner of Zen. My miracle is that when I feel hungry, I eat, and when I feel thirsty, I drink." The temple fell into profound silence as the simple profundity of these words settled into the hearts of those present. The priest, expecting magical displays, found himself face to face with a teaching about the extraordinary nature of ordinary experience. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates how real spiritual power manifests not in supernatural demonstrations, but in complete presence to what is actually happening. Why do we seek the miraculous outside of our immediate experience? Zen Buddhism reveals our tendency to bypass the profound simplicity of life in search of dramatic spiritual experiences. We imagine enlightenment as something exotic, supernatural, or removed from daily existence, when in truth, it's the capacity to be fully present to whatever is arising. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that consciousness itself is the ultimate miracle. The fact that you can taste food, feel thirst, hear these words, or experience any sensation at all is more extraordinary than any magic trick. Yet, we take these everyday miracles for granted while seeking special powers that would somehow validate our spiritual development. Look deeply at your own experience right now. Can you feel the miracle of breathing without having to think about it? The wonder of your heart beating steadily? The extraordinary fact that light enters your eyes and somehow becomes the vision of these words? These are the real miracles available in every moment. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the Zen understanding that we don't need to become someone special to access spiritual truth. We need to fully inhabit who we already are. The Buddha taught, there are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. The path is not about developing supernatural abilities, but about going all the way into the simple reality of this moment, starting exactly where you are, with whatever you're experiencing right now. Consider how the priest's question revealed his own spiritual materialism. the belief that wisdom can be measured by impressive displays rather than by the quality of one's presence. This trap catches many seekers who mistake the extraordinary for the spiritual, when the truly spiritual is found in bringing complete attention to the ordinary. Tonight, as you eat your next meal or drink a glass of water, can you taste the miracle that Bankai pointed to? Can you experience the wonder of simple biological processes that sustain your life? As the Buddha said, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The miracles we seek are not above us, but within the simple reality of being alive. Let us continue on our journey with a story about discovering the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart. In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student approached his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an ancient maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing earnestly for years, yet lately questions had been arising that reached deeper than formal instruction. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the student gathered courage to voice what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to excel in studies, to accomplish things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest longing that had once driven his own seeking. After contemplative silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this admission. "Why did you desire their pride so intensely?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender recognition. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be secure and abundant. But the reason I desired this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something essential. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I, in turn, would feel I had sufficient reason to love and accept myself. I was seeking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be evidence of my worthiness even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my striving." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. "But then one day, I awakened to a revolutionary possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could bypass all external validation and simply learn to love and accept myself unconditionally? What if I didn't require anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence?" The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. "I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer circumstances, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as constant as my own heartbeat, independent of any external validation?" The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never considered. "And that realization began your quest for self-realization?" "Exactly," the master nodded. "That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with discovering what was already complete within." After contemplative silence, the student asked, "And did you never again desire their pride? Did that longing completely disappear?" The master chuckled softly. "Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Conditioned patterns don't vanish overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before." He gestured toward the darkening garden, where fireflies had begun their dance. I learned to see those approval-seeking thoughts as passing phenomena, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could observe them with interest and compassion, but I no longer gave them power to determine my worth. "So you still cared what others thought?" the student asked. "I respected their opinions and honored their perspectives," the master replied. "But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the determining factor in whether I felt at peace with myself." The master's face radiated quiet joy, and never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like discovering I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was revealed to have been within me all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with destructive thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the master's discovery. Most suffering stems from the mistaken belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through external achievements or approval. Here, we discover one of the most revolutionary insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural birthright to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy, not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, achievement, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance feels foreign. Our culture intensifies this conditioning by promoting the myth that happiness comes from external sources. Each message reinforces the delusion that we are incomplete as we are. Consider how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you modify authentic expression to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on external feedback rather than internal recognition of inherent value? When we love ourselves unconditionally, we create a foundation of fulfillment that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with gratitude rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without devastation, because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself, and that person is not to be found anywhere. You, yourself, deserve your love and affection." This isn't narcissism. It's recognition of fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and witnesses your experiences is not improved or diminished by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear, like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the tenderness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a beloved child learning, or the same compassion you'd feel for a friend in difficulties. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for authentic transformation. In discovering this unconditional love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here, beating steadily in our own hearts. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the venerable abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Cho's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Chao Cho reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Chao Cho stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Chao Cho calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao Chou's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Chou offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. Let us continue on our journey with a story about the intensity required for genuine spiritual awakening. This is the tale of the drowning lesson. Beside a crystal-clear mountain river, where water flowed over smooth stones with the endless song of moving current, a hermit had established his practice. For years, he had lived in solitude, finding in the rhythm of flowing water and changing seasons a perfect mirror for the movements of his own consciousness. One morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the canopy and the air carried the fresh scent of mountain laurel, a young man approached the hermit's simple dwelling. The seeker had traveled far, his clothing dusty from the journey, his face earnest with spiritual longing. "Master," the young man said, bowing respectfully, "I wish to become your disciple." The hermit looked up from his contemplation, studying the newcomer with eyes that had grown accustomed to reading the subtle signs of genuine versus superficial spiritual interest. "Why?" the hermit replied simply. The young man paused, considering his answer carefully. "Because I want to find God," he said finally, believing this to be the most noble response. What happened next took the seeker completely by surprise. Without warning, the hermit sprang to his feet, grabbed the young man by the scruff of his neck, and dragged him toward the river. Before the stunned visitor could protest, he found himself being pushed into the clear, cold water. The hermit's strong hands forced the young man's head beneath the surface and held him there. Panic set in immediately. The seeker's lungs began to burn as his oxygen depleted. He kicked and struggled with increasing desperation, his arms flailing as he fought to break free. Every second felt like an eternity as his body screamed for air. Nothing existed except the urgent, overwhelming need to breathe. After what seemed like a lifetime but was probably only a minute, the hermit finally pulled the gasping young man up out of the water. The seeker coughed violently, water streaming from his nose and mouth as he struggled to fill his lungs with precious air. His entire body shook from cold, shock, and the aftermath of near drowning. When his breathing finally normalized, the hermit spoke again, his voice carrying a different quality, still gentle, but charged with unmistakable intensity. "Tell me," he said, watching the young man's face carefully, "what did you want most of all when you were underwater?" The answer came without hesitation, raw and honest. "Air." The hermit nodded slowly, satisfied that his lesson had found its mark. "Very well," he said. "Go home and come back to me when you want God as much as you just wanted air." Without another word, the hermit turned and walked back to his place of meditation, leaving the dripping, shaken young man to contemplate the profound teaching he had just received. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Yet this wisdom must be ignited by genuine spiritual fire, not merely intellectual interest. The hermit's dramatic teaching illuminates the difference between casual spiritual curiosity and the total commitment that authentic awakening requires. What emerges from this story is recognition that spiritual seeking demands the same intensity and urgency we naturally bring to physical survival. The young seeker thought he wanted God, but his desire was still within the realm of preference rather than necessity. He wanted spiritual awakening as an addition to life rather than as life itself. Why do we approach spiritual development with tentative commitment? First is our attachment to comfort and the familiar. Genuine transformation requires letting go of who we think we are, which the ego experiences as death. Second is our misunderstanding of what spiritual seeking entails. Popular culture presents awakening as a pleasant expansion, but traditional teachings describe it as a dismantling of illusion. Third is our tendency to compartmentalize spirituality as one area among others, rather than a complete reorientation of our relationship to existence. Consider how this plays out in contemporary seeking. We collect techniques like trophies, jumping from meditation retreats to healing workshops to consciousness conferences, accumulating experiences without allowing any single practice to fundamentally transform us. We want the insurance policy of spiritual development without paying the premium of total dedication. The drowning experience represents what mystics call the dark night of the soul, moments when our usual sources of identity and security are stripped away. In such moments, we discover what we truly value most deeply. This is the quality of desire that spiritual awakening requires. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck wrote, "Practice is not about achieving some special state. Practice is about being willing to die to who you think you are." The hermit's lesson brought the young seeker face to face with this death-like quality of authentic spiritual work. This intensity doesn't mean spiritual practice should be grim. Rather, it means bringing the same passionate engagement to inner development that we naturally bring to whatever we value most deeply. A musician practicing for Carnegie Hall, a scientist pursuing a breakthrough, all demonstrate the focused dedication that spiritual awakening requires. The river represents the flow of ordinary consciousness, where we spend most of our time skimming along the surface. Being pushed underwater symbolizes the necessity of going deeper into the unconscious patterns that actually govern our lives. This depth work requires the same survival level intensity the seeker experienced when deprived of air. Tonight, as you consider your own spiritual aspirations, can you honestly assess the quality of your desire? Is your seeking driven by curiosity and preference, or by necessity? What would it mean to want truth as much as you want your next breath? As the Buddha taught, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The path to awakening lies not in accumulating more spiritual experiences, but in bringing the totality of our being to whatever practice we choose. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of identity and the mystery of consciousness itself. This is the tale of Chuang Tzu and the butterfly. The ancient Taoist sage Chuang Tzu lived simply, spending his days in quiet contemplation of the natural world and the deeper mysteries of existence. He was known for his profound insights into the nature of reality and his ability to see beyond the surface appearances that convince most people they understand the world around them. One afternoon, after a morning of walking through bamboo groves and observing the play of light on water, Chuang Tzu lay down beneath a flowering tree to rest. The gentle warmth of the sun, the soft sound of wind through leaves, and the fragrance of spring blossoms created the perfect conditions for deep relaxation. As he settled into this peaceful state, his consciousness gradually shifted from ordinary waking awareness into the mysterious realm of dreams. In his dream, something extraordinary occurred. Chuang Tzu found himself transformed into a beautiful butterfly, his human form completely forgotten. He fluttered gracefully from flower to flower, his delicate wings catching the sunlight as he moved through a world of pure color and sensation. There was no memory of being a philosopher, no awareness of human concerns or intellectual pursuits. He was simply and completely a butterfly, experiencing the world through compound eyes, navigating by instinct, living entirely in the present moment of flight and discovery. The butterfly that was Chuang Tzu felt utterly free, unburdened by the heavy thoughts and complex worries that typically occupy human consciousness. There was only the joy of movement, the sweetness of nectar, the warm touch of sun on delicate wings. This wasn't a dream about being a butterfly while knowing he was really a man. It was the complete experience of butterfly existence, with no trace of human identity remaining. Then, as suddenly as the transformation had occurred, Chuang Tzu awakened. He found himself lying beneath the tree, the afternoon sun having moved across the sky during his sleep. His human body felt solid and familiar, his philosopher's mind immediately active with questions and observations. The vivid dream began to fade as waking consciousness reasserted itself. But instead of simply dismissing the experience as an unusual dream, Chuang Tzu found himself puzzled by a profound question that challenged everything he thought he knew about identity and reality. He sat up slowly, still feeling the lingering sensation of flight, and pondered the implications of what had just occurred. Was I just now a man dreaming I was a butterfly? He wondered aloud. Or am I perhaps a butterfly now dreaming that I am a man? The question wasn't merely playful speculation. It pointed to something fundamental about the nature of consciousness and identity that most people never consider. If the experience of being a butterfly had felt completely real and authentic while it was happening, how could he be certain that his current experience of being human was any more real or permanent? Buddha's wisdom teaches us all conditioned existence is impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This ancient teaching illuminates the fluid nature of identity and the importance of not clinging too tightly to any particular sense of self. Why do we assume that our current state of consciousness represents the ultimate reality? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to take our present experience as fixed and absolute, when in fact, all states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, sleeping, are temporary and constantly changing phenomena arising in the vast space of awareness. Chuang Tzu's question challenges our basic assumptions about who and what we are. During the dream, the butterfly identity felt completely authentic and real. Upon waking, the human identity seems equally authentic and real. But which one represents his true nature? Or is perhaps the question itself based on a false premise? Consider your own experience of identity throughout different states of consciousness. Are you the same you when you're dreaming as when you're awake? What about when you're deeply absorbed in an activity, or in deep meditation, or in moments of creative flow when self-consciousness disappears entirely? Which of these states represents your real identity? In Zen practice, we explore the possibility that all these different identities are simply temporary appearances in consciousness, like waves on the ocean or clouds in the sky. The waves are real, but they're not separate from the ocean. The clouds are real, but they're not separate from the sky. Similarly, all our various identities and experiences are real, but they're not separate from the underlying awareness in which they appear. The butterfly dream reveals something profound about the nature of transformation and possibility. If Chuang Tzu could completely become a butterfly in his dream consciousness, what does that suggest about the fixed boundaries we imagine exist around our identity? How solid are the limitations we place on ourselves based on our current circumstances or self-concept? Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Chuang Tzu's experience points to this same teaching. The more deeply we investigate the nature of selfhood, the more we discover that our fixed ideas about identity begin to dissolve. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." The man and the butterfly are both real and both empty of permanent, independent existence. They are temporary formations in the field of consciousness, each authentic while present, each naturally dissolving to make way for whatever comes next. Look deeply at your own sense of identity. How much of who you think you are is based on roles, memories, and concepts that are actually quite fluid and changeable? What would remain if you let go of your attachment to being any particular type of person? Tonight, as you move between waking consciousness and the dream state, can you remember Chuang Tzu's profound question? Can you hold your identity lightly, recognizing that whether you're experiencing yourself as human or butterfly, worker or dreamer, the awareness in which all these experiences arise remains constant and unbound? As the Buddha observed, everything is impermanent. Strive on with awareness. The man dreams of being a butterfly. The butterfly dreams of being a man. But the dreaming itself, the pure capacity for experience, remains as vast and free as the sky, untouched by whatever temporary forms dance within it. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the nature of emptiness and the surprising places where we discover truth. This is the story of grasping what cannot be held. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted gently on the morning breeze, Master Sekyo sat with one of his most earnest students. The young monk had been studying Buddhist philosophy for several years, filling his mind with concepts about the nature of reality, the illusion of the self, and the teaching of emptiness that seems so central to the Buddha's wisdom. He could recite passages about shunyata, discuss the philosophical implications of non-being, and engage in lengthy debates about the relationship between form and void. But for all his intellectual understanding, something felt missing. The words remained just words, concepts floating in his mind without the direct experience that would make them real. He approached his teacher that morning with a question that had been troubling him for months. "Master," the young monk said, bowing respectfully, "I have studied the teaching of emptiness extensively. I understand that all phenomena arise and pass away, that nothing has permanent, independent existence. But I feel like I'm only grasping concepts. Can you help me get hold of emptiness itself?" Sekyo looked at his student with knowing eyes. He had seen this struggle many times before, the gap between intellectual understanding and direct realization, the frustration of trying to grasp with the mind what can only be known through experience. "Show me how you would get hold of emptiness," the master said simply. The monk thought for a moment, then cupped his hands in the air as if he were trying to capture something invisible. He held his hands carefully as though cradling a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. His face was earnest and concentrated, his entire being focused on this attempt to demonstrate his understanding of a teaching about the very nature of nothingness. "There," he said, holding his cupped hands very still. "I'm trying to hold emptiness itself." Sekyo looked at the student's empty hands and shook his head gently. "That's not very good," he said with a slight smile. "You haven't got anything in there at all. You're just holding air and calling it something special." The monk's face fell. He had been so certain that his gesture captured something meaningful about the teaching. "Well, master," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment and confusion, "please show me a better way. How does one truly get hold of emptiness?" Without warning, Master Sekyo reached out and grabbed the monk's nose, giving it a sharp, firm yank. "Ouch!" the monk yelled, his hands flying to his face, his eyes watering from the sudden, unexpected pain. "Master, that hurt me!" Sekio released his grip and smiled broadly. "Now that," he said with satisfaction, "is how you get hold of emptiness." The monk stood there, rubbing his nose, completely bewildered. His nose throbbed with very real, very unempty pain. How could this physical sensation, this undeniable presence of discomfort, have anything to do with emptiness? It seemed like the opposite of everything he had been studying. But as the initial shock wore off, something began to shift in his understanding. The pain in his nose was absolutely real, yet it was also completely impermanent, already beginning to fade. It had arisen from nowhere, would disappear completely, and left no permanent mark on reality. It was both utterly present and completely insubstantial. More importantly, in the moment of that sharp sensation, all his conceptual thinking about emptiness had vanished entirely. There had been no philosophical analysis, no abstract understanding, just direct, immediate experience. The gap between the one experiencing and the thing experienced had dissolved in the simple reality of ouch. As the Buddha taught, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Here we discover that emptiness is not the absence of experience, but the very nature of all experience. Everything arises, exists for a moment, and passes away, leaving no permanent trace while being completely real in its moment of appearing. Why do we struggle so hard to understand emptiness conceptually when it's the very fabric of every moment? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of trying to grasp reality with our thinking minds rather than experiencing it directly. We turn the most immediate truths into abstract philosophies, then wonder why they feel distant and theoretical. The monk's mistake was common and understandable. He was trying to hold emptiness as if it were a thing, an object that could be captured and possessed. But emptiness isn't an object. It's the very condition that allows all objects to appear and disappear. It's not something we can grasp. It's what makes grasping possible. Consider your own experience right now. The thoughts arising in your mind. Where do they come from? Where do they go when they fade? The sensations in your body, the sounds around you, even your sense of being someone who is reading these words. All of it is appearing and disappearing in the space of awareness like clouds in an empty sky. This emptiness isn't blank nothingness. It's alive, responsive, creative, the very capacity for experience itself. When Sekio yanked his student's nose, he wasn't demonstrating the absence of sensation, but the miraculous way sensation appears from nowhere, exists vividly, and dissolves back into nowhere, all within the spacious emptiness of awareness. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The monk was rejecting his direct experience in favor of his concepts about experience. The master's intervention brought him back to the immediacy of seeing, feeling, and knowing without the filter of philosophical analysis. In our daily lives, we constantly encounter this same teaching. The anger that seems so solid and permanent when we're caught in it. Where does it go when it naturally subsides? The worry that feels so important and real. What is its actual substance when we look closely? Even our sense of being a solid, separate self, isn't it actually more like a flowing process? A river that appears to be the same while constantly changing. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This isn't a philosophical statement, but a direct pointing to what's happening right now. Everything we experience is empty, in the sense that it has no permanent, independent existence, yet it's all perfectly real as it appears. Tonight, as you notice thoughts, sensations, and experiences arising and passing in your awareness, can you sense the emptiness that Sekyo was pointing to? Not as an abstract concept, but as the very space in which your life is unfolding. Can you feel how this emptiness is not separate from the fullness of your experience, but is its very nature? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The emptiness of all phenomena isn't something we need to achieve or understand. It's what we are, what everything is right now. We just need to stop trying to grasp it and let ourselves be grasped by it instead. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow." But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change." Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax right now and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master were sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the most fundamental truth that surrounds us yet remains invisible. This is the tale of the fish and the ocean. In the vast depths of the Pacific, where sunlight filtered down through layers of blue and green, and coral gardens swayed in gentle currents, a young fish swam restlessly through familiar waters. Despite being surrounded by the wonder of ocean life, schools of silver fish moving like liquid metal, sea anemones dancing in the current, and the rhythmic pulse of waves far above, the young fish felt troubled by a persistent question. One day, approaching an ancient sea turtle whose shell bore the scars and wisdom of countless journeys, the young fish asked earnestly, "Elder, I keep hearing other sea creatures talk about something they call the ocean. They speak of it with such reverence, as if it's the most important thing in existence. But I've searched everywhere, and I cannot find this ocean anywhere. What exactly is this mysterious thing everyone talks about?" The old turtle's eyes, deep and patient like tidal pools, regarded the young fish with gentle amusement. "Little one," the turtle replied in a voice worn smooth by decades of storms and calms, "the ocean is this very thing that surrounds you on all sides at every moment." The young fish looked around frantically, darting left and right, swimming up toward the distant surface and down toward the sandy bottom. "But I don't see anything surrounding me. There's nothing here but water and fish and plants and rocks. Where is this ocean you speak of? Why can't I see it?" The turtle settled more comfortably on a bed of soft kelp, understanding that this was a teaching moment that required patience. "Of course you cannot see it, young friend," the turtle explained. "The ocean is both inside and outside of you. You were born in the ocean. You breathe the ocean. You are nourished by the ocean. And one day you will return to the ocean." The ocean flows through your gills and around your body just as naturally as your own scales cover your skin. It is so much a part of you that it has become invisible. The young fish paused, beginning to sense something vast and fundamental that had been present all along but remained unnamed. You mean this water I swim through? Is the ocean? Yes, the turtle confirmed. You have never been separate from it, not for a single moment of your existence. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with awareness. This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with the Tao, the fundamental flow of existence that permeates everything, yet remains largely unnoticed in our daily lives. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual blindness. Like the fish who cannot see the ocean, we live immersed in the sacred, but fail to recognize it because it is too close, too constant, too fundamental to our existence to register as separate from ourselves. Why do we struggle to perceive the Tao, this universal flow that sustains and surrounds us? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of seeking the extraordinary while overlooking the ordinary. We imagine that spiritual truth must be dramatic, mystical, or separate from everyday experience. We look for God in burning bushes while missing the divine presence in morning coffee, in the breath entering our lungs, in the simple fact of awareness itself. The Tao expresses itself in everything we encounter: the changing seasons, the cycles of sleep and waking, the rhythm of our heartbeat, the way thoughts arise and dissolve in consciousness. It is the organizing principle behind both the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of fern leaves, the same pattern expressing itself at every scale of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you might glimpse this underlying flow without recognizing it. The way traffic naturally organizes itself, despite having no central controller. The way conversations find their own rhythm and timing. The way your body breathes without conscious direction. The way solutions to problems seem to emerge from somewhere beyond deliberate thinking. These are all expressions of the Tao working through apparent chaos to create spontaneous order. Zen teacher Alan Watts taught, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The Tao is similar. It cannot be grasped or contained because we are expressions of it rather than separate observers of it. Every attempt to understand the Tao through conceptual thinking is like the fish trying to get outside the ocean to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean the Tao is merely a philosophical concept. It is the most practical and immediate reality. The intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body. The awareness in which all thoughts and sensations appear. The life force that animates everything from redwood trees to bacteria. In Chinese philosophy, the character for Tao literally means the way or the path. But this is not a path we walk towards some distant destination. It is the path that walks itself through us, the way reality unfolds moment by moment, without requiring our management or control. Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Yet here we are, using words to point towards something beyond words. This is the beautiful paradox of spiritual teaching. We must use the limited to point toward the unlimited, knowing that the finger pointing at the moon is never the moon itself. Tonight, as you feel the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, can you sense the Tao expressing itself through this simple miracle? Can you recognize in this automatic process the same intelligence that moves the planets and changes the seasons? The Buddha taught, "Look within, thou art the Buddha." You are not separate from the ocean of existence any more than a wave is separate from the sea. In recognizing this fundamental non-separation, we stop seeking the Tao and begin living as its conscious expression. Our next story reveals the difference between technical mastery and true mastery of oneself. This is the lesson of the archer and the bridge. A young man had devoted years to perfecting his skill with the bow and arrow. Day after day, he practiced in all weather conditions, his dedication absolute, his focus unwavering. His technique became flawless, his aim so precise that he rarely missed his target, even at great distances. Word of his remarkable ability spread throughout the region, and he began winning archery contests one after another, each victory feeding his growing pride and confidence. Flush with success, and perhaps a bit intoxicated by his own reputation, the young archer decided to seek out the ultimate challenge. He had heard whispered stories of an old Zen master who lived high in the mountains, a man renowned not only for his spiritual wisdom, but also for his legendary skill with the bow. I will challenge this old master, the young man thought, and when I defeat him, everyone will know that I am the greatest archer in all the land. He found the master's simple dwelling and issued his challenge with the confidence of youth. "Old man," he said, perhaps more boldly than was respectful, "I have heard of your reputation with the bow. I challenge you to demonstrate whether your skill can match mine." The master, ancient eyes twinkling with quiet amusement, simply nodded his acceptance. The young archer immediately set up his demonstration. He selected a target at a considerable distance, drew his bow with practiced precision, and let loose his arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the exact center of the bullseye with a satisfying thud. Without pausing, he notched a second arrow, drew, aimed, and fired again. This arrow split the first arrow down its center, a feat of such technical brilliance that few archers in the world could have accomplished it. The young man turned to the master with obvious satisfaction, his chest puffed with pride. "There," he said, gesturing toward his perfect demonstration. "Let's see if you can match that display of skill." The old master looked at the target, then at the young man, and smiled gently. But instead of drawing his own bow, he simply motioned for the archer to follow him. "Come," he said quietly, "let us find a more suitable place for this demonstration." Curious about what the old man had in mind, and confident that no location could diminish his superior abilities, the young archer followed the master up a winding mountain path. They climbed higher and higher, the air growing thinner, the path more treacherous, until finally they reached a place where the mountain was split by a deep chasm. Spanning this terrifying gap was a single fallen log, weathered and narrow, that served as a bridge between the two sides. Far below, so far that the bottom disappeared into shadow, the chasm yawned like a hungry mouth. The slightest misstep would mean certain death. Without a word, the old master calmly stepped out onto this precarious bridge. His movements were unhurried, graceful, completely at ease despite the mortal danger. When he reached the center of the log, where it sagged slightly and swayed with his weight, he paused and turned to face a distant tree on the far side of the chasm. Drawing his bow with the same casual precision he might use in his own garden, the master took aim and released his arrow. It flew across the void and struck the distant tree with a clean, direct hit. Not necessarily more accurate than the young man's shots, but accomplished under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned warrior. The master then gracefully stepped back onto solid ground and gestured toward the log bridge. "Now it is your turn," he said simply. The young archer approached the edge of the chasm and looked down into the seemingly bottomless abyss. His mouth went dry, his palms began to sweat, and his legs trembled beneath him. The very thought of stepping onto that narrow, unstable bridge filled him with paralyzing terror. The technical skill that had made him so confident suddenly seemed irrelevant in the face of this primal fear. He tried to force himself forward, but his body refused to obey. His hands shook so violently that he couldn't even grip his bow properly, much less aim with any precision. The steady breathing and focused concentration that had served him so well in controlled conditions completely abandoned him. The master watched this struggle with compassionate understanding. "You have developed great skill with your bow," he observed gently, "but you have little skill with the mind that lets loose the shot." As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between mastery of technique and mastery of the mind that employs the technique. Why do we so often mistake technical proficiency for true mastery? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to focus on external accomplishments while neglecting the inner development that makes those accomplishments meaningful. We perfect our skills in controlled environments, but discover our limitations when facing uncertainty, danger, or genuine challenge. The young archer had indeed achieved remarkable technical skill, but only under ideal conditions. When his environment changed, when fear entered the equation, when the stakes became real, when his sense of safety was threatened, his carefully cultivated abilities disappeared entirely. His mastery was revealed to be shallow, dependent on external circumstances rather than inner stability. Consider your own areas of expertise. How does your competence hold up under pressure? When faced with genuine stakes, unfamiliar circumstances, or emotional challenges, do your skills remain intact, or do they crumble like the young archer's confidence on the bridge? In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unshakable presence, the ability to remain centered and effective regardless of external conditions. This doesn't mean eliminating fear or challenge, but developing the inner stability that allows us to function skillfully even when afraid, uncertain, or under pressure. The master's demonstration wasn't about showing superior archery skills. It was about revealing the profound difference between skill that depends on perfect conditions and skill that emerges from inner mastery. His arrow didn't need to be more accurate than the young man's. It simply needed to be released from a place of genuine equanimity. Zen Master Bankei taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle any situation." This points to a quality of awareness that remains constant, whether we're shooting at safe targets or standing on precipices. It's the difference between confidence that comes from controlling our environment and confidence that comes from trusting our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." One arrow shot from genuine presence and inner stability has more value than 1,000 arrows shot from ego and carefully controlled conditions. True mastery reveals itself not in perfect circumstances, but in our ability to maintain our center when everything around us is uncertain. Look deeply at your own relationship to challenge and fear. Where in your life do you perform well in safe, controlled environments but struggle when stakes are raised or conditions become unpredictable? This isn't a failure. It's simply information about where your practice needs to deepen. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and competencies you've developed, can you distinguish between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you sense the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenge and the confidence that comes from meeting challenge with presence? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. Life is the bridge over the chasm, uncertain, sometimes frightening, always requiring us to find our balance, not in the safety of solid ground, but in our ability to remain centered while walking through space. True mastery isn't about perfect aim. It's about maintaining our equilibrium, no matter where we find ourselves standing. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of seeking and finding. This is the master sculptor's discovery. In a bustling stone quarry beneath towering mountains, a master sculptor moved among the marble blocks with the practiced eye of one who had spent decades coaxing beauty from stone. The morning sun cast golden light across the quarry, illuminating countless blocks that seemed to whisper their stories to him. "Aha!" he would say, running his weathered hands across smooth surfaces. "There is a heroic figure locked in that piece, and a saint trapped inside that other one." His reputation had grown precisely because of this gift, his ability to sense what he called the suchness of every stone, to see beyond raw material to its true nature waiting to be released. But on this morning, the sculptor's heart carried a different weight. For over 40 years, he had been searching for something special, the perfect block from which he could create his masterwork, a glorious statue of the Buddha. His energies were waning now, and still this elusive Buddha block remained hidden from him. He had traveled to great quarries around the world, consulted experts, hired specialists to scour remote areas, yet nowhere could he find that one perfect slab that would allow him to release the most perfect likeness of Buddha. Feeling the weight of his lifelong quest, the sculptor sought consolation from a local Zen priest who headed a small temple at the end of his street. The temple was modest, with a peaceful courtyard where a stone well sat, surrounded by carefully tended moss. "Master," the sculptor said, bowing deeply, "I have searched for 40 years for the perfect stone from which to carve the Buddha. My life's work remains incomplete." The priest listened with kind eyes, then smiled gently. "No problem," he said with such simplicity that the sculptor felt both confused and hopeful. "Do you mean you can tell me where I might find the perfect material from which I can release the Buddha of my dreams?" the sculptor asked, excitement rising in his voice. "Of course." "Where?" The priest raised his hand and pointed across the courtyard. "Over there," he said, indicating the stone well. The excited sculptor hurried to the well and peered down into the still, dark water. There, looking back at him with the same questioning eyes, the same lined face marked by years of searching, was his own reflection. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it? The deeper teaching here shows us that what we seek most desperately often lies not in some distant place or perfect circumstance, but in the very ground of our own being. Why do we exhaust ourselves searching everywhere except within? Zen Buddhism reveals that we become so focused on the object of our search that we forget to examine the searcher. The sculptor had examined thousands of stones, traveled countless miles, yet never considered that the very consciousness doing the seeking was itself the perfect material for awakening. Consider how often throughout your day you postpone contentment, waiting for better circumstances. "I'll be happy when I get the promotion, find the right partner, when conditions are finally perfect." This is seeking the Buddha block everywhere, except in the reflection looking back at us right now. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." The sculptor's profound realization wasn't that he needed to become something different, but that he needed to recognize what he already was. The perfect material for expressing Buddha nature isn't found in external circumstances, but in the awareness that recognizes, seeks, and creates. The well represents the still point within consciousness, where seeking ends and finding begins. When we stop looking outward and peer into the depths of our own awareness, we discover that the one who seeks and the sought are the same. In Zen practice, we speak of original face, the essential nature that exists before conditioning. This original face isn't hidden in some special place. It's looking back at us from every mirror, every moment of genuine presence. Tonight, as you encounter the reflection of your own seeking mind, can you recognize the Buddha nature that has been with you all along? Perhaps it appears in your capacity for wonder, your longing for truth, or simply in the awareness that notices these very words. As the Buddha taught, look within, you are the Buddha. The masterwork you've been seeking isn't waiting for perfect materials. It's waiting for the recognition that the artist, the art, and the awareness that appreciates beauty are all expressions of the same essential nature. As our time together draws to a quiet end, take a moment to notice the feeling of release that has settled over you. Can you feel the subtle shift from holding on to letting be? The deep calm you've touched upon tonight is not a distant shore you have landed on, but a gentle current that has always flowed within you, waiting for you to simply stop struggling against it. The Buddha once taught, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." This profound insight is the thread that weaves through every story we have shared. It reminds us that our burdens are often not the events themselves, but the weight of our attachment to them, our grip on yesterday's sorrows and tomorrow's anxieties. Each tale was a quiet invitation to uncurl your fingers, to release what you have been carrying, and to discover the lightness that comes from inhabiting this moment, just as it is. Even if the mind wanders, as it naturally does, the understanding you have cultivated here is now a part of you, a deep well of tranquility you can return to at any time. As you prepare for deep rest, consider that these ancient narratives have not taught you a new skill, but have reminded you of an innate ability, the ability to let go. They have lit a path back to your own center, a place of profound stillness that exists beneath the surface of thought and worry. In the silence that follows my voice, simply rest in that awareness. Notice the gentle rhythm of your breath, the feeling of your body at ease, and the quiet contentment of a mind that has been given permission to be free. These teachings are not relics of the past, but living truths, as relevant today as they have ever been. Their wisdom is not found in complex ideas, but in the simple, direct experience of non-attachment. Tonight, you have felt this truth for yourself. As you drift from this tranquil awareness into sleep and then back into your waking life, carry this sense of release with you. Let it be a quiet companion, a source of strength that reminds you that you hold the key to your own peace. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.